is quite haunting, and not even just because of the last scene, which is quite haunting, but you know, in some version of this movie, you could see ending it with the, you know, the end of the sort of past story. They're loaded onto the you know, into the cars, and there's a moment there where it's very quiet and everyone's sort of almost like contemplating the gravity of all that has happened, and you can almost see someone deciding to end the movie there. But instead, the movie goes on. You see people getting off the cars. You see them breaking that drama and you're like, hey, you know, oh, you know, I don't know what you know. And then you end up with this haunting scene. What went into the decision making to have the film end the way it went? And not just the haunting part at the end.
Yeah, I didn't plan on the walking off shots being the ending. That was never. That was a discovery because I mean, you know, one of the big questions you should all be left with is what happened to the miners, right? What happened to those 2,000 miners? Ultimately, the film takes us in another direction, which is those ghosts need to be answered to in many ways. But what the town's trying to do is reconcile this in today. And I always say this: the 17 in Bisbee 17 is 100% 2017. This is a film that takes place in the present. It takes place in the now. And for me, I guess watching the footage of people walking off, you have the white kid say, "This is the largest group therapy session ever." But importantly, you then have the Mexican-American guy say, "You guys were good, maybe too good."
Yeah.
Which is too good. I mean, you were good, maybe too good is one of the most revealing statements of the whole movie. Like, what does that mean to be too good at deporting?
Right.
You know, and so I guess I saw a lot in there of what it felt like to be there that day, which it did. It felt like basically, I would say action. They would go at each other in a way that we couldn't script or predict, and they were going at each other, and they were working through stuff that like we only had a glimpse of. I mean, I've been going to Bisbee for 15 years. I love the place. I feel connected to it, but still, like, they were working through stuff that we were only tapping the surface of what they were working through. But then at the end of the day, they were coming together, and they were hugging each other. They were saying, "I didn't mean anything. You're great. You know, I love you." All that stuff.
Right. But they're changed.
But they just did something together. I think that's more important than anything. Like, they did this together, and the sense of the town, the town had the sense that they did this thing together. And that became what I became most sort of connected to, was like, what does that say? What that says is, you can work through demons, you can work through history, you can try to understand things at a deeper level, and then you can hug each other afterwards, and you can, you know, go get a beer, you know. And I think we've kind of, I mean, today was a fucking awful day. I mean, it was a beautiful day for some things. You know, some people found guilty for murder, which is what they should be found guilty of. And then it was an awful day for other things. And we're literally on the brink of what feels like a conflict between left and right in this country that is irresolvable, and it's terrifying. And to see that conflict exist in Bisbee, which is like it exists everywhere else, and to see them actually hugging each other and being like, we did something together, we created something together, we created images together, that ultimately was more important than anything. So that's why we come back to that.
All right, I'm going to hold my last question and let others get in on the fun. Who has a question out there?
Back there.
There's a microphone up here.
Oh,
this. So come
on
up
to this
so that
microphone.
everyone can hear.
Please.
Right up front here.
I like that microphone situation.
So, I absolutely adored the film, and I agree with everything you just said with that final question. I couldn't help but feel like this was, in its own wonderful way, an all-American, like Joshua Oppenheimer film. And not only because of the themes of genocide and memory, which are so powerfully used, but the way that you used performance theory to sort of like bring out people's basis ideologies, even in this idea of all-American debate. How do you think that you were most influenced by Act of Killing and The Look of Silence? And how did you decide to ultimately bring in a probably more positive direction?
I guess, well, for me, I've been going to, like I said, I've been going to Bisbee since 2003, and weirdly, this was 5 or 6 years before I made my first feature, and my first thought was, maybe we could reenact the deportation with the locals and restage the whole thing. So weirdly, it was, and I don't mean, but that's not to say, I love the act of killing. I know, like a lot of people, you can debate that film in a number of ways, but I am inspired by the sort of, I guess the thing I'm most inspired by is the lengths that he's going to try to get at something else that's not normally said, and there's extreme lengths gone to, right? But the weird thing, I guess, is because I've been thinking about Bisbee for so long, and I've made a series of films that are about performance, that before I saw Act of Killing and after, it's, you know, I don't know, the film, I mean, to me, they have some things to do with each other, they have nothing to do with each other at the same time. To me, you know, Act of Killing is dealing with perpetrators directly. And there's something really, really, really different than that with dealing with the sort of the historical mythologies that build up to create the sort of the lack of memory, the forgetfulness, the you know, all that stuff. What you're seeing, a lot of the images that you're seeing in the movie, I think, are about American ideologies that we buy into and we cling to deeply, you know, and that goes deeper than, I mean, that's what most Westerns are about. That's what, you know, that's what, I mean, in terms of performance theory, like there's movies that've been doing that from the beginning, you know, from the beginning of movies that have been sort of about how we perform our ideologies and how we work through things through that stuff. So I love, I mean, any comparison with The Act of Killing and Josh's work in general is an honor, but I feel like I'm hopefully doing something kind of different, maybe.
I think you are. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks for the comment and question.
Act of Killing to me is about horror. Yours was about humanity and history. But
yeah, I really enjoyed the film. Thank you.
Thank you so
It's a
much.
great work of art. It's interesting that it comes out right now, and I don't know how long it took to make this film, but I guess you shot it last year. But it's interesting, the way I look at it is coming out at this point where you have children in cages and people being deported and threats against people. And I wonder how much of that played into your thinking when you were planning the film and also making the film?
So, thank you for that. We started in October of 2016, so a month before the election. And if you go to the border, you know that, like, so Tombstone, which appears briefly in the film, is sort of a hotbed for really radical right-wing vigilanteism. And when I was first going to Bisbee back in 2000, you know, the early 2000s, the freedom fighters and the men of it were killing people on the border. And so, like, the sort of tragedy of the border has been going on for a really, really long time. And when we started, it was before anyone thought Trump could be elected, and no one thought that was a thing. So we thought that, look, the word deportation and the fact that half of the people deported that day were Mexicans will certainly have a metaphorical edge to it. But, because we're all dealing with the border stuff. But we were making a labor story, first and foremost. Well, what happened to the IWW that day, and the fact that Arizona is a right-to-work state, which means unions aren't really welcome, although the teacher unions are kicking ass, and it should be noted how well they're doing across the country, and Arizona included. But it was a labor story, and that was the crux of it, knowing that there would be these echoes of the border, right? Trump gets elected, we come back in January, we come back in March, and then we move there in May. And by the time we're filming in July, every single person understands exactly what we're doing. At that point, I mean, ICE was clearly at that point militarized in the way that they have been. The children in the border story was not a thing that people were talking about yet, although it was starting to happen. But people knew. It was just no doubt, and that's one of the powerful things about it is, no matter what you believed, you knew that day, you knew reenacting this would create these images. And I mean, just like one small version of this is when we were editing the film, the day that we locked picture, like where I figured out where I wanted the scene where Mel gets pulled out of his bodega. Mel, who is a Lebanese immigrant whose first experience in America was moving to Bisbee. Like his entire, like his falling in love with the country was falling in love with Bisbee, which is just beautiful and strange in the early 80s, right when it was transitioning from a mining town to an art town. And that day that we locked that scene where he gets pulled out was the same day that that 107-Elevens across the country were raided. And I literally closed the window on my editing system and opened up the news, and there were images that looked exactly like our film. And we couldn't predict that, and it was horrible. And but I think they knew, the thing is that even, I live in Missouri now, I'm from North Carolina, but I've lived in New York for many years. My emotional intelligence about the border doesn't come close to what it means to live in Bisbee, what it means to live in any of those towns on the border. And I feel like they were far more advanced than we were even though we knew too. But they knew what they were doing that day. And so the residents couldn't be clear. So we didn't have to say it, it doesn't have to be said. There was plenty of people saying Trump's name, and it was like, let's just leave that out. There's no reason to.
Thanks.
Thank you.
If any other questions, please come up to the mic. Talk about how this film fits into your body of work. You mentioned a little earlier about, you deal with performance and documentary in your work. Where does this fit into the Robert Greene pantheon, if you will?
It's not a pantheon if no one's seen any of the movies. I guess one of the funny thing is I really did come up with like that first idea in 2003 is like we should reenact this. And I'm only, like as I'm talking about it, I'm realizing like that was the first real movie idea, was making this film. And then so maybe everything was working up to this thing in some ways. I made a film with my sister called Katie with an I, and what I realized is that I'm shooting her as she's going through the last 3 days of high school. And then what we end up shooting is how she's performing the idea of what it means to be a grown-up. And that's what attracted me, was this performance thing. And then I made a pro wrestling film where people are making performances all the time. I made a film called Actress, which was about an actor, but she's playing to the camera all the time, and so it really destabilizes how you think of documentary. You're looking at someone who's challenging your notions of authenticity by her own performance, and it really becomes about how she gets trapped in roles that she's chosen, wife, mother, those roles. And then Kate Plays Christine, our last film, was about a woman trying to understand and play a role that's basically impossible. Christine Chubbuck, who committed suicide on television in 1974. And so it got to, for me, it's been, I think when you put performers and actors in a documentary, it really, I said destabilized already, but it destabilizes things. It causes like a reaction, because people hunger for authenticity in documentaries. They hunger for like an experience that's unmediated in some ways, and they want to see what's real. And then you challenge them on that, and it opens up all these other questions. And then I guess what we found, and Bennett's helped me with all these films, what we found is like you can, by challenging the way people see truth and authenticity, you can open up other things. And for actors, it was about how we are locked in these roles that we play in our daily lives. In Kate Plays Christine, it was really about how storytelling itself can be corrosive and destructive. And maybe we don't need to tell every story. Maybe some stories should be left untold. But this is about watching people work through something through performance and working through sort of a collective American trauma through performance in some ways. And to me, it's not about like blurring the lines of documentary fiction. That's more, every movie blurs the lines of documentary fiction, all of them. Even yours, even your very straightforward movies. They're edited, so they're fiction. Yeah.
You tell me.
Little lesson for you. It's just gonna. I talked to Steve about this stuff tonight. Just keep that in mind. It's not about that. It's about like what do these forums open up for other things, basically.
Yeah. Well, this may be oversimplified because I'm a simple guy, but in Actress and in Kate Plays Christine, right? You're dealing with actors finding authenticity, connecting performance to their own lives in ways that are really interesting, and here it's the reverse in a way. It's like you're dealing with people who aren't actors, who are playing the role of actors, but in the process of doing that, they're getting in touch with something deeper within themselves that's both historical and personal, you know?
Yeah, it's just a way for people to express themselves. I mean, that's what our goal is with documentaries, is find way, I mean, there's internal things, and we filmmakers are obsessed with how do you make that the internal external.
Yeah, and people in documentaries, even more straight-ahead documentaries, are performing who they are. And one of the things that's always, I think, interesting is that in the early stages is that they have certain notions of what you expect them to be.
Yeah.
And so they try to live up to those notions.
Yeah, well, I love that tension. I think, like, I honestly think that a lot of documentaries do everything they can to eliminate those questions.
Right.
Because and for sometimes really good reasons. Like a movie like The Interrupters, like you don't want people to be. The movie, what the movie is about is too important. It's really about important shit, and it's about life and death. And so your instinct to stay clear of like questions about what your camera's doing, it makes sense. Like, why would you want to introduce these questions of what the camera's doing? Because that just clouds the issue when really it's about what the people are doing on the street that you have the privilege of recording, right? Like, but I guess I would never choose to make a movie like The Interrupters because I want to make a movie about how people are working through things, you know?
Right.
Like, I want to...
But even in The Interrupters, there's performance.
There is, of course. I mean, Amy Matthews is the greatest documentary character probably in 25 years. I mean, she's a superstar, and she knows it, and she performs with that. But I do think that there's different goals, and like to me, I want to find stories where there's something buried, and the way to understanding the reason why it's there, or reason why it's not talked about, is through these sort of filmmaking techniques, and then it gets to be like a self-critique and a sort of comment on something deeper at the same time.